What's going on, everybody? So I took a road trip across the country, which was a 30-plus-hour road trip, and I brought all 5 of my handhelds: the ROG Ally, Legion Go, Steam Deck, Nintendo Switch 2, and the Switch Lite. And I used all of them respectfully during my time on the road and sometimes off the road in about 7 different states. And first I'm going to talk about the Steam Deck. Now, because I have SteamOS and my Steam games installed in 2 separate handhelds, the Legion Go and the Steam Deck, some games on the Steam Deck needed to be verified in order for me to play them. I tried to play Metal Gear Solid 5 on the road on the Steam Deck and it just wouldn't work. I tried to connect my Steam Deck to a hotspot and for some reason that wouldn't work. So I ended up playing Metal Gear Solid 5 on my Legion Go using SteamOS. So that's the only downside about having 2 separate handhelds with SteamOS. Sometimes certain games need to be verified. But overall, the Steam Deck's vibrant OLED HDR screen was the best thing about playing the Steam Deck OLED. Even though it has an 800p screen, which is lower resolution than all of my other handhelds, excluding the Switch Lite. I played the Steam Deck the most because it shined through the summer road trip quite literally. The screen is just so vibrant and so bright, and the battery and efficiency of the Steam Deck made it so much easier to actually use the brightness in an optimal way that I naturally gravitated to the Steam Deck OLED during this road trip because it had all of my favorite games. I had my 2 terabyte inside of it. It's a good size, it has good grip, and also the OLED screen is simply incredible. I think because of the OLED screen, the HDR on the Steam Deck is 100 times better than that of the Nintendo Switch 2. In fact, most people cannot tell the difference between HDR on and off on the Switch 2. So naturally, moving on to the Nintendo Switch 2, the screen isn't that bright, especially for an HDR screen. I couldn't tell the HDR unless I took a screenshot of both and took a separate picture on my phone. Playing it during the day, I can see it just fine, but while recording, you can't really see the screen that well. I have about 105 games installed on my Switch 2, so going through that library with ease, easier than the rest of the handhelds, was a godsend, especially if I just wanted to jump in a game really quick and I was tired due to being on the road for so long and didn't really want to commit to any kind of launches or installations or anything like that, similar to PC handhelds. Obviously, my time with the Switch 2 was the best because of its bigger screen and its absolute convenience. But which handheld would I consider the best to use on a road trip? Honestly, I think it's a tie between the Steam Deck and the Switch 2. I didn't throw the Legion Go in there because the Legion Go is just too bulky and heavy. It's inconvenient to bring anywhere, honestly. Having SteamOS in there is wonderful, but there's a separate compatibility list for handhelds using SteamOS outside of Steam Deck. So certain games that work on Steam Deck actually don't work on my Legion Go while using SteamOS, which is very unfortunate. And during my 3 days on the road, I didn't use the Legion Go once, mainly because it needed to be attached since I had the Legion Go's parts in separate cases. And as far as the Switch Lite goes, I didn't really use that either. I mainly just used it to get some shots, but I found myself mostly playing the Nintendo Switch 2 and the Steam Deck. Because the Steam Deck is more operable when it comes to Linux compatible games. While Nintendo Switch 2, even though a lot of my Switch 1 games worked on the Switch 2, there were games that crashed, such as Gear Club Unlimited 1, and a couple other games had crashing issues on the Switch 2 as well. So I would say that with certain titles, the Switch 2 was less convenient than the Steam Deck. But obviously the Steam Deck isn't as convenient as something like a Nintendo Switch 2 if you're playing Nintendo Switch 2 exclusives, and I was playing a lot of them. I was trying Hitman World of Assassination and Street Fighter 6. But the thing about Hitman World of Assassination, it doesn't play as well as it does on the Switch 2, like it runs on the ROG Ally. On the ROG Ally, Hitman World of Assassination is absolutely perfect. And also the ROG Ally has better speakers than the Nintendo Switch 2, so while there were a lot of background noises of my car's tires hitting the pavement, the Nintendo Switch 2 could barely be heard because I also had straps connected to my car, so the window covers were slightly open and it made it harder to hear my handhelds. But luckily I had the ROG Ally, which has by far the loudest and clearest speakers out of any of my handhelds. including the Steam Deck. I think the ROG Ally has bar none the best speakers in the game so far. Whenever I had to reach behind my seat in order to put the Nintendo Switch 2 away, it was a lot easier to slip it into my bag, opposed to something like the Steam Deck OLED, which would get caught inside of certain pockets in my backpack. So taking the Switch 2 out and putting it back in my backpack while on the road going about 80 miles an hour sometimes was definitely very serviceable as a portable handheld, opposed to something as bulky as the Steam Deck OLED. But either I go to the Steam Deck OLED, the ROG Ally, or the Legion Go. Obviously the ROG Ally is the second pick when it comes to portability. Taking that thing out, and it was just as easy comparing it to something like the Nintendo Switch 2 because it is pretty slim and it's about the same height and length as the Switch 2. But obviously the ROG Ally is heavier thanks to the 74 watt hour battery, but also thanks to the 74 watt hour battery, I was able to play my ROG Ally without charging it a single time. But I had to charge my Nintendo Switch 2. That might have had something to do with the fact that I played it a lot more, but when checking my battery count on the ROG Ally, it said I had 12 hours remaining of battery time. So the 74 watt hour battery, since it was the biggest battery I have with my current handhelds, that size definitely helped when it came to portability and convenience. I also had a bunch of power banks in preparation, but most of the time I was so tired that I just decided to take out the lightest and most convenient, and that had to be the Switch 2. Obviously it is the newest toy, but playing something like Street Fighter 6 in such a slim and small form factor compared to the other handhelds just won me over entirely. On the Switch 2, Street Fighter 6 looks very close to its PC handheld counterparts, and a lot of people say that these handhelds are opposite from each other, and when it comes to UI, I have to disagree. SteamOS is very similar, if not more accessible than the Nintendo Switch 2's operating system, which I believe also runs on Linux. But when it comes to something like Windows 11, obviously you can do a lot more on Windows 11, but it's harder to select what you want to play. But most likely, if you download a 10-year-old game, most likely that's going to work on Windows because it was designed for that operating system. While with the Switch 2, even some of my Switch 1 games weren't fully compatible with the Switch 2. So that's kind of alarming, especially since Nintendo is saying that most of their games work. I'm assuming most of their games are like the hentai games you see on eShop. Meanwhile, games like Gear Club Unlimited 1 is still having crashing issues as well as Dying Light. I tried playing that game, and when I tried to go to Rise's HQ, the game crashed on me, unfortunately. Also, that verification issue with Street Fighter 6 was definitely heartbreaking because I had to delete my entire save data in order to play it offline. That gave me PTSD from the times I had to play Street Fighter 6 online in order to verify it on my Steam Deck and ROG Ally. So there are still offline issues with Nintendo Switch 2 exclusive games, unfortunately. That's also something that might make me go to my ROG Ally a little more because I have cracked games on there. Just like when I tried to play Metal Gear Solid 5 on the Steam Deck and I had to verify it, so I just said, screw it, I'll play the cracked version. I'd say because of those reasons, it's a tie between the ROG Ally and Nintendo Switch 2 because Hitman World of Assassination played a lot better on that, especially since I had Hitman 3, which had more single-player focused features. But yeah guys, let me know what you think about which handheld would be best to bring on a road trip, especially a summer road trip. Since the Nintendo Switch 2 is very slim, I thought it would overheat, but that thing was cold to the touch most of the time. And I think that alone is very impressive, but the ROG Ally is also very silent and cold most of the time depending on what you're playing. But of course the thin form factor just gets me every time, so I have to say the winner is the Nintendo Switch 2. Yeah guys, thank you so much for watching this video. It was so much fun to make. Thanks to all the crazy locations I traveled to in order to make this video. I hiked and I paid for certain shots in this video just to make it even more ridiculous. But thanks again for watching and for all the new subscribers. I'm very grateful for all of you. Thanks again. Have a good one. Later.